Well, we're standing here in Pearse Street, as near as we can to what was formerly 204 Pearse Street. And for perhaps up to 50 years, that was the premises of Clarkin's coal merchant. Now, the proprietor of Clarkin's was Andy Clarkin, who was also a prominent Fianna Fáil politician and a senator from about 1944. And one of the key landmarks in connection with the building was a large clock, square-shaped clock, that projected out from the wall from number 204 Pearse Street, called locally Andy Clarkin's clock. Now let's move to the other side of the Liffey for a moment, not very far, to the Custom House. And working there from about 1935 was one Brian O'Neill, better known to us as Flann O'Brien, the novelist, and Miles Nagopoline, the writer of the satirical Crushkin Lawn column in the Irish Times. That was a very popular column almost from the time he started writing it in 1940. And one of the reasons was that no person or institution or sacred cow of Irish society was left immune from its satirical lash, let's say. Well, in June 1951, Andy Clarkin, coal merchant, was elected Lord Mayor of Dublin. And in October of that year, 1951, Miles had a column or two in his Crushkin Lawn column pointing out that Andy Clarkin's clock, the new Lord Mayor's clock on his business premises here, was stopped and freezing the time at 5 to 9. And he alleged, in fact, the clock had been in that condition since about 1938, and he was very critical of Clarkin, new Lord Mayor, for the civic spirit, or lack of civic spirit, in leaving in that condition. Well, there was no reaction from Andy Clarkin to this allegation, and so Miles stepped up his campaign further up to the end of the year, and he headed a number of these columns, ACCIS, A-C-C-I-S-S, which he explained to his readers was an acronym standing for Andy Clarkin's clock is still stopped. But there was a private meaning to ACCIS as well, which would have been known to the initiation in Dublin at the time, and in the smaller city there was a lot of people in that category then. Apparently Andy Clarkin was a quiet sort of a man who used to defer a lot to his wife, and he used to defer to her usually in the following terms: well, I'll ask Sis about that, Sis being his wife's name. So ACCIS, A-C-C-I-S-S, had a private meaning that was embarrassing to Lord Mayor Andy Clarkin. So, still no reaction about the stopped clock, so Miles stepped up his campaign further. He was urging his readers to go around town when they met one another to adopt a special hand signal in imitation of the stopped clock's hands. One hand almost vertically up and the other hand across, representing the time of 5 to 9. And the people, when they met one another, would adopt this hand signal, and one would say, have you got the right time, please? And the other would say, why don't you ask Sis? See? So this was a matter of great hilarity in the column, of course, at the time. But Miles had made one very serious mistake, because in one of the columns, the ACCIS columns, he had allowed himself to be photographed looking up, staring up at the stopped clock in disgust. Now, why this was important was that although Miles was known, or Brian O'Neill was known to be a writer of the Crushkin Lawn column, and there had been complaints about the political content of some of those columns to his employers in the Custom House previously, the department had always replied to these complaints on the basis that, well, as far as we can find out, there's at least 3 writers of the Crushkin Lawn column, so it wasn't possible ever to say that Brian O'Neill, civil servant, was the author of any particular column. So this is why Miles had made a very big mistake in allowing himself to be photographed, Brian O'Neill looking up at the stopped clock. Well, anyway, as Eamon Kelly might say years ago, things rested so, because Miles didn't return to that issue at all of ACCIS during 1952. But in early 1953, he returned to the issue of Andy Clarkin's stopped clock. And in a famous column in the 5th of February 1953, he wrote, Accessoo! Accessoo! Oh, bless me again. Andy Clarkin's clock is still stopped. A cone, a cone. And then he launched into a tirade about Dublin Corporation and some of the people working in it. He wrote, in the Dublin Corporation there are few persons of some standing and education who might be conceded for convenience the title gentleman, but the rest are unfortunate Seamuses. If you asked one of the latter what they thought of Tito, that's Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia, they would reply that he wouldn't stand a chance unless the distance was at least 1.5 miles. And if you then wittily asked whether it would be a good thing to have a bet on the totalizator, the great jaw would drop. The ruined graveyard of tombstone teeth would be revealed. The eyes would roll, and the malt-eroded voice would say, "Huh?" Now, this was not a description of Andy Clarkin, Lord Mayor of Dublin, but it was a description that those in the know in Dublin certainly, and many of his readers, would recognise straight away as being a description of his own minister, Patrick Smith. Well, Minister Smith was not amused, let us say. He called in the Secretary of the Department the same day and insisted that Miles should resign his civil service post. I understand he said to the Secretary, "Look, I'm sick and tired of this three-card trick business. I want him out, and I want him out immediately." So Miles lost his civil service post. You know, a work colleague of Miles has described the difficulties in dealing with him in his last months in the office. Michael Flann wrote, "Some days would find O'Nolan at his desk, but only for minor periods, staring gloomily ahead and blindly signing the documents presented. Other days would find him at his typewriter, firing off bursts at another target, and violently resenting interruption. Mr. O'Nolan, Mr. So-and-so has..." "Fuck Mr. So-and-so. But the County Council feel that we should..." "Fuck the County Council. Fuck the whole fucking lot of them." And Michael Phelan went on to describe how Miles departed the Custom House on the 20th of February 1953 with a final fanfare of fucks. So that's how Miles exited the Custom House. Andy Clarkin continued to operate as a coal merchant and also serve as a senator up to 1955, the year of his death, as far as I'm aware. And nothing, I think, was ever done about the stop clock either during that time, or maybe up to the time it ceased to operate when the premises was closed down in the mid-1960s. But you know, I think Andy Clarkin probably had the last laugh on Miles as a result of the Axissu episode, and may indeed have benefited in his business from the whole episode. In any event, he might have relied for a defence on remarks, I think, made by an Austrian novelist who once said, "Even the stop clock is right twice a day." So that is the story of Andy Clarkin's clock, which I think we can say had a big hand in calling time on the official career of Ireland's most famous modern humourist.